This is the second card in the Path of Soul, so it relates to evolution. And we have here the principle of judgment. And this is the most terribly misunderstood energy form in the universe. It has to do with blame and guilt. They're wrong. Most energies, like violence, regret, and so on, they're not pleasant, but they're not wrong. They have their place. Even fear has its place. It's quite a good idea to be afraid of things like crocodiles and poisonous snakes. It's a self-protection thing. We distort it so that we're afraid of that which doesn't threaten us quite often, but fear is good in context. Blame and guilt are never okay. Never, never, never. Whatever you do which is funded by blame or guilt necessarily creates a worse outcome. If somebody tries to do an emotional blackmail number on you, don't go along with it. Ever. If it doesn't feel like you're doing this out of your own free will, it's wrong. And most particularly when somebody's wagging their finger at you. So we get authority figures saying you should, and you must, and you have not my permission. And you get parents saying the same thing. And they say, you can't. You're not able to. You know, it's not only you may not, it's you can't. I was told when I was a young teenager that I can't dance. And my music master told me, he kicked me out of his music class because I can't get music. And yet, my whole life has been spent in music and in dance. They were wrong. However, I'm stubborn and rebellious by nature, and if somebody says I can't, that really motivates me to get the job done and make sure I can. It's just a quirky part of my nature, and not everybody's like that. Quite a lot of people hear you can't, and they believe it. That's a judgment. And you mustn't, that's wrong. It's written in the Bible or somewhere else that it's wrong, it's nasty, it's naughty, it offends God. Not true. None of that is true. God doesn't take offence at anything. It's a ridiculous idea. We have taken on this burden of judgment and guilt and blame wrongly. And it's the singular problem, singular evil in the world's history. I've read books on this and they're obscure and you can't know whether they're believable or not. There's no way you can prove what they say, but it just makes sense to me that once upon a time, long, long ago, there was this wonderful way of being. We're talking so far prehistory, it's unimaginable. That people lived on a continent called Pangaea, and Pan was a country where there was pretty much instantaneous manifestation. You thought something and there it was, in the physical realm. Now this is the way the astral realm works. Think is. But in the physical realm, it doesn't work like that. You can't just think something into existence here on the physical realm. Most people cannot. Whereas masters, true enlightened masters, they can, like Christ could turn water into wine. They don't have that restriction of the physical realm at that level, but I'm not ever expecting to meet anybody at that level. However, we do have that history where there was a time when life was that pure. It was good. There wasn't any reason to be afraid, and there was no fear, and there was no reason to be guilty or blameful, and there was none of that. And then some alien force entered the realm of the earth plane and corrupted it by introducing this dark evil of blame and guilt. And I use those words together because blame and guilt is the same thing. And I want to explain a principle here. This is one of the most powerful tools of healing I have ever learned. So I'll see if I can explain it clearly. Imagine being born in purity as a baby with a field of perception which is so sensitive, all the pushings and pullings of emotions and thoughts and difficulties. It pushes against this kind of perceptual membrane, almost like a spider's web or a gossamer. And so this is like metaphor, entirely metaphor. So we're pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed as babies, and we start to become the shape of that which is pushing us. And what pushes us repeatedly, so let's look at the negative sense. If it's positive, it's all fine, it all just works fine. But if it's negative, then there's, let's say the father is raising his voice, angry at the television for not giving him his favourite program. That anger will be felt by the baby, even though it's not directed. And then the baby starts crying and the father is angry with the baby, and then there's more. And if it's done repeatedly, it becomes more and more that which shapes the baby's psyche. And if it's powerful and passionate and intense and directed, then all the more so. And the baby's psyche, as each of us has got this going on as we grow up, the psyche is held in that shape that the baby took on ever so early, within the first 3 months in life, for example. And then our psyche is that shape instead of that shape, metaphorically speaking. Now, we grow up to become attractive towards the same energy that we experienced as a baby. So if there were angry people shouting at us as babies, we'll get angry people shouting at us as adults. But let's take it to the card of judgment. If we are guilted by somebody blameful, then we have this appetite for guilt unconsciously later in life, which attracts blameful people, because blame and guilt are two sides of the same coin. And here's the two sides. There's the concave side and the convex side. That's the two sides of this coin. So a blameful punch becomes a guilty receiver, the baby. And then the baby has also the other side. So you've got blame and guilt tied up with the same formula. This applies to any neurotic condition. So if we have been blamed as children, we become ridden with guilt. Roman Catholic Church knows all about this. When we grow up filled with guilt, we're conscious that we're feeling guilty. But what we're not conscious of is that the guilt has got its other side, blame. Guilty people are inevitably blameful, and they probably don't know that they are. Now, if you know this, then you will know that the best way to heal guilt is to stop blaming. So you've got this guilt here and this blame here. If you stop blaming, then you smooth it out from the other side. And as you stop blaming, you stop feeling guilty. So that's how you heal the injuries of a child, not by looking at the injuries, but by looking at the impact of the injuries on the psyche that turns you into a perpetrator instead of a victim. So what we have with the blame and guilt formula is that we were blamed And now we're talking about the human psyche, the collective human psyche, going back a very, very, very long time indeed. We were told off by some alien visitor of some kind, or told that we were bad people because we were spending our time playing instead of working, or whatever that we were given. And it probably was something like that, because we feel that we need to do something to earn our bread. We don't actually expect to be given a living. You know, it's really deeply written into our psyche that we must work for our bread. Don't see the purpose of that at all. I am, therefore I deserve. That's a sort of a guilt-free psyche, isn't it? But we're given this really strong feeling that we must do this if we are to be good people, and that translates into everything that we've ever been taught by society and by our parents and by our school teachers. And that's what's warped our mind into the judgment pattern of our species. Now, very few people escape this. Very, very few people indeed. And if we are seekers on the path of realization, there will come a time, if we're ardent enough, and we take guidance and we look at feedback and correct our wrong directions and so on. If we actually do the job properly, as we would do for any career at all, we'd have to go through all of that process to become an accountant or an architect or a doctor. We'd have to go through the same process. So if we go through that process of awakening, you just decide to become an awakened person, a realized being. You make that decision and you get it done. Then at the point when you get it done, you will notice that you no longer feel guilty about anything, and you no longer feel judgmental about anyone. That's evidence of realization. And it is then understood that you're illuminated, in a sense. You see the light. You can see that all the warping and distortions of light give rise to anger and blame and guilt and sorrow and sadness and grief and all the things that are really dark, heavy energies. The sort of heaviness that goes with this is what prevents the ego from being light. We carry the burden of blame and guilt because we were told off for being, we were told off for being. This is central to a lot of Christian teachings. It's called original sin. And in the Hindu tradition, it's called karma, and so on. It's just false. It's not absolutely false. This is the trouble. It's kind of got wisdom within it, but the interpretation and the implications of that teaching lend towards shadowy interpretation. The principle of karma is basically the one that we're discussing, where, look, you're not perfect yet. You're set up to attract opportunities to perfect yourself. Why else would you come? There isn't any other purpose of incarnating unless you've got some karma, not to work off, silly idea, but to get on with. You know, I'm not a very good so-and-so, therefore I want this little problem to deal with, you know, and to grow through. If you haven't got any friction, you're never going to climb up a hill, are you? You can't improve without challenges. And that's what karma is. And that's what original sin is. And that's all it is. And the word sin, I've described this before, is a French word, sans, means without. It's an archery term. Trying to hit the bullseye, whoops, you missed without, sans, and that became sin. So what do you have to do? You have to rethink. You have to aim differently. Repenser, repent. So sin and repentance are corruptions of the archery term. Look, you missed the bullseye, have another go. It's that simple. Now, the judgment card in the tarot is on the path of soul, and it's the evolutionary energy. So when we get this understanding that there is nothing to be guilty about at all, ever, and you must never blame anyone else if you're to be free of guilt. If you understand that, you really live that as well. You practice it, okay, you get the conceptual understanding, then you've got to live it in practice. And notice your prejudices. Notice your reservations based on false morality. If there is morality, it needs to be self-claimed. It needs to be your backbone, your principles. That's your morality. I don't do that because it's wrong. It offends my conscience to do that. Good morality. I don't do that because my father told me not to. Bad morality. See the difference? So if you're free of all of that, then you're on the path, you're really there, you're close to being realised. And if you're realised, you are free of all of that, definitely. It's not that one leads to the other, it's just description. So what we have here with the evolutionary sense of the soul is that when you're free of that burden, that heavy thing that brings you down, down, down into the ego, which is not necessarily self-proclaiming and proud. It could equally be self-deprecating and ashamed. That's a stronger ego problem in my experience than arrogance, that people don't make enough of themselves. That's an egotistical problem, to think of yourself as small, smaller than average, smaller than normal. That's an ego problem. That's where egotism lies, because we've been bullied by people that don't want us to be as big as we actually could be. When you release that heavy burden that keeps you down as a poor, egotistical person that has self-deprecation, then it lightens up. You rise. It feels light as well, and you don't get pulled down. Depression is pulling you down by this heaviness. So the realization is this, that there is no one to judge you. Not really. You've made that up. Parents, school teachers, governments, bullies, they all exist because you've made it up. And when you make it up differently, that they don't exist except in your imagination, you will notice that you're not stopped by the police. You're not bullied by your spouse. It just goes away. You just escape the blameful energy in life. And if somebody starts to get off on one and starts expressing their guilt at being so poor at something or another, you don't listen to them. You don't want guilt in your life. Even when somebody else is claiming it, you don't want it. Don't listen to that conversation. And if you're blaming someone else, stop doing it. And if somebody's blaming you, stop letting them. Deal with it. You can't just have the concept. You've got to deal with it. You've been living with this, so there's this residual habit pattern of looking for blame and guilt in the world. So you have to deal with it by setting your boundaries at a higher level. I remember my mother's conversation with me after we just buried my father. And she started to dump on me the kind of conversations that previously she'd been dumping on him. And it was slagging someone off. She was complaining about some neighbour up the road. First time she'd ever done it to me, because, like I say, she was doing it to her husband. That was his purpose in life, that she could moan at him. And she started moaning at me about the world's problems. And I interrupted her, which is just a bit unusual for me. I say, stop. Don't ever do that to me. We're not going to get involved in this. You're not going to moan at me. You're not going to indicate that you have blame for other people to me. I'm not going to receive that. If you start talking like that, I'll walk away. And she was quite shocked. But I did it. I mean, I'm not going to listen to blame. And this subtle point there, it's one thing to stop blaming other people. I think we all know that that's quite a good idea. But I'm going one step further here. I'm not allowing other people to do it to me. I won't have it. I won't have blame and guilt in my life. And I claim authority, the right to be this way, because It's just wrong. I know it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. Everything done through blame or through guilt leads to a worse result. It's wrong. And what that means is there is no one judging us, ever. God is not a judgmental animal. Doesn't care what's right and wrong. Doesn't know what's right and wrong. Has no interest in the question. Is an absurd idea to God. How could the creator of all and everything have a judgment about good and bad? Might have a preference, sure, as we all have with our artworks. I write songs sometimes, and some of them I think, yeah, I like that one. That was all right, but not special. I got a preference, but I'm not going to say about my less beautiful songs that they're wrong or bad or evil or guilty or blamed. You know, it's ridiculous. The Creator doesn't have judgment. We, as a species, have attracted judgment, blame from an alien species because it's not a part of the human condition. It's just intuitively wrong. And if you can't get that, then I can't explain it. But it's intuitively obvious that blame and guilt are wrong. And that level of intuition is, shall we say, a baseline for our soul's evolutionary journey. We have to trust our evolutionary sense to our intuition sometimes. We are evolving away from the need for rational argument. Analysis is paralysis. Nice little keyword phrase for you there. That which we try to rigorously define as the case for all time, it's also wrong. It's kind of a judgment, isn't it? It must be now how it was before. You can't bring forward requirements into the current moment and still be free of judgment. Judgment is, in the judgment card case, the release of expectations that the past will replicate into the future. So then we come to the understanding of present-centered consciousness, and we've been moving towards this over the last couple of 3 tarot cards. We're moving into this understanding that being free to radiate love and consciousness is what the sun brings. And what judgment is bringing is the greater degree of liberation, that there is no examination at the end of all of this. There is no test. There is no right and wrong. There is no good and bad. It doesn't exist. It only has a foothold here, but it doesn't actually exist as soon as we give it no traction. If it's got no purchase within us, then it can't be within us. So we are attracting it because we're allowing it to continue to exist. But it doesn't exist unless we do that. So stop doing it and it doesn't exist. Judgment, examination, tests, right and wrong, doesn't exist. Judgment is an illusion that there could be a way that we must be. There isn't. The judgment card is the mirror of our self-judgment. In that case, it becomes a different thing. Like when you've done something, and I was talking about songwriting earlier, or it could be you've interacted with a person, or it could be that you've had a good walk, or whatever you've just done, and you have a feeling afterwards. Oh yeah, that's a nice song. Didn't like that very much. Oh, that was a great walk. You know, oh, I love talking to so-and-so. That is the judgment. Because that's the meaning of that experience. And it's not only a feeling, but it's absolutely rooted deeply within your feeling body. And you understand it as well. So it's consciously feeling what is. That's judgment. It's called, there is a principle in Sufism. Let me just explain this as well. When we do sound practices, mantra in other words, it is taught that the reason we do the mantra is so that we have the memory of the sound in the mind. The speech itself is in order to create the model of that sound in the mind. And we can actually get to a point where we no longer need to speak the words, and we move it into another dimension called the fikr of the practice. We do any spiritual practice in silence is called fikr. And the fikr of the practice is much more subtle and therefore much more powerful. You really get it as a feeling. And then at the end of that process of doing the fikr of the practice, you practice fikr as-sir, the secret, the deepest secret of the practice. And that's when you stop doing the practice, even in silence. You just notice the echo. You move into a more yin state. You feel the echo of the practice resonating back from the cosmos. You become aware of the meaning of the practice only then. That's what the judgment card is. If you find yourself now to be free of guilt, absolutely free of guilt, which means no embarrassment, absolutely free of blame, no resentment, no prejudice, probably living in joy all of the time, and in every moment you're just feeling the echo of what has gone before, reflected back from the cosmos, and you can feel that. And that's what gives meaning to this moment, the echo of all that you've done before. All that you are now is the echo of all that you've done before. Being here now is the meaning of all of the previous doings, including thinkings. So this is judgment, surely, where we judge this moment on a qualitative level as being that. Not good or bad, but that's what it is. Which kind of translates immediately, when you think it through, to I am. There's no difference between those two things. I am. And that's what I mean as well. What I am is what I mean. So we're simply reflecting upon everything that's gone before, because it doesn't exist anymore. So everything that was is in this reflection. And we're becoming conscious of reflecting ourselves to ourselves, or externalization of self into the feeling aspect of self. And that purpose, that event, is meaning, is the statement, I am. And nobody else cares, actually. They say they do, they pretend they do, but nobody else cares. And God doesn't mind what you do, as long as you do it. I mean, if the thing is, if you don't do that, then you don't know God, because that's where God is. And so if you're not looking there, you're not looking at God. God is that level of consciousness in the present moment, here and now. I am being the echo of all that has ever happened. Or actually, in a strange way that's hard to explain, this is also the echo of the future. It's difficult to explain why. But here we have the absolute depth of subtlety of echoing everything, past, future, good, bad, wrong, right, blame. It's all nothing but the still center in the middle of some... I envisioned it as a whirlpool or even a hurricane. And there's this still center, which is the place of safety and beauty and service, if there is, which there is, a hurricane building up steam at the moment. Look at world politics, you'll know what I mean. Wars, famine, hunger is expressing itself wildly. Dangers in the air. We're going for a hurricane. A hurricane is just whirling around now. There's only one place to be, and that's this place. And that's the judgment that we're looking for. Am I deeply at peace in the center of myself? If not, how can I do that better? How can I deepen that sense of peace? Because that's where your power is. That's where your safety is. That's where you're free of all the shit that's just hit the fan. If you want to know where to be safe, that's where it is. Give up other people's versions of blame and guilt and musts and coulds and shoulds, and be what is. A very deep level of knowing. That's what judgment means to me.